Joining me now is Patrick Gathara, award-winning political cartoonist, satirist, and political commentator based in Nairobi. Hello, Patrick. It's great to have you. Now, you've written a lot about the U.S. elections in relation to Africa. One of them is titled "The Blackface Election Looms." What are you driving at?
Well, thanks for having me. The point I'm trying to drive is that there has been, in a sense, a caricature of what an African election is, and there's been lots of comparisons of what's happening in the U.S. with how people perceive elections in Africa as essentially stolen, as chaotic, and as violent. And the point I was trying to drive was that actually Africa runs its elections in many African countries, not all of them, ran pretty good elections. If you look at places like Ghana, really credible elections, and much better than the US does it. So rather than call the US election an African one, I think it's a caricature of an African one, which is where the idea of blackface comes in.
Okay, so in doing so, what are some of the major issues happening in the U.S. you're trying to address?
Well, I think in the U.S., for us, from where I sit, the U.S. has for a very long time been one of the loudest proponents of free, fair elections and democracy in general. And it has been preaching to Africa for a very long time about how we should improve our system and actually helping, in many cases, African countries to improve that. But it seems as it was preaching water, it was drinking wine. There has been, within the U.S., very little reform of its own system, and as it moved towards the authoritarianism we see with Donald Trump, and with the chaos or the chaotic system that we see within its elections. When you look at it, you will wonder, why is it that you are teaching us about democracy but not practicing it at home? Why were you teaching us about how to hold a free, fair, credible election but not practicing this at home? So in a sense, this is the U.S. becoming a victim of its own hubris. It needs to go back home and start looking at its own systems, whether it is about having a uniform way of people registering to vote. These are some of the things it has been insisting should be happening in Kenya. Having one electoral commission to oversee the whole exercise. In the US, we do not have this. So they really need, I think, to sit back and look at their own systems and work out how they need to improve them.
Now, you mentioned earlier using President Trump, in this case, a bit autocratic while being president, and you would expect Africans to maybe stay away. There's still some support on the continent for Trump, though. They want him to win. Why is that the case, you think?
Well, I think within the continent, there's lots of support in countries like Kenya and Nigeria, where you've got really powerful religious groupings, especially right-wing evangelical churches are really active there. And I think they're taking their cue from the US, where that is one of the biggest voting blocs that's supporting Trump.
What can the U.S. learn from democratic countries in Africa?
Oh, there's lots to learn. It can learn how to run elections, credible elections. It can learn what to do when it comes to preserving the peace and how to carry out an election at a time when you've got a crisis. I think African countries over the last 50 years have done a lot of work on their electoral systems, on their democratic systems. They have learned how to contain executives. The era of the big African man has pretty much passed on. You still have a few here and there, but in the main, it's not as bad as it was, 30, 40 years ago. So there's lots that Africa has learned about doing democracy that the US can learn from.
Okay. Patrick Gathara, award-winning political cartoonist, satirist, and political commentator in Nairobi. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.